I sang that song for more than 60 years, a song of praise to Joseph Smith, the prophet of the Restoration and founder of the LDS Church. The church I was born into, the church I loved with all my heart and taught my children to believe in, the church I served as a bishop for 5 years. I knew the church was true. I knew Joseph Smith was a prophet. I was a faithful Latter-day Saint. My life has been built on certain truths, but wishing doesn't change the truth. I didn't start out challenging my belief in the church. Believe me, this new look at things has been gut-wrenching. I know there are those of you out there watching who are in as much turmoil as I was. But I hope that God will lead you to the truth. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free." When I finally learned the truth about the real history and doctrines of Mormonism, I realized that I was following the gospel of Joseph Smith and not the gospel of Jesus Christ. I have come to learn that many others have made a similar journey out of the bondage of religion and into an authentic relationship with Jesus. And that's what this show is all about. Courageous people who want to share their story, hoping that you, the viewer, will discover the same new life in Jesus. So if you're a Latter-day Saint who is struggling with questions or seeking a genuine encounter with the Savior, we invite you to join us tonight. We have a joyful message that we want to share with you. I'm your host, Bishop Earl, and tonight we are continuing to meet the band members of Adams Road Band. Tonight we have Steve Kay with us. Steve, we appreciate you being here, and
yeah, it's good being here.
Yeah, it's nice that way. What do you do in the band, actually?
I sing and I play bass.
Do you? That's the little 4-string guitar, right?
Yep, that's right.
I never learned that. I played the 6-string.
Okay,
a little bit, but so it's nice to have you with us. And tell us a little bit about your heritage as a Mormon. You were raised in the church, I guess.
I was. Yeah, actually, I had a pretty rich Mormon history in my family. My great something grandfather was the first conductor of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
Wow, what was his name?
John Perry.
Wow.
He was a Welsh immigrant who came across, and I'm also descended from Anson Pratt, who's one of the brothers of Orson and Parley that you hear about.
Yeah.
And and actually I had several great-grandparents that were born in Colonia Juarez, Mexico, which is
polygamous,
that polygamous group. Yeah.
Wow.
So pretty rich heritage.
Were you born here in Salt Lake, or?
No, I was actually born in Seattle. So that's,
were you?
Yeah, you'd think I would be born in Utah with that heritage, but no, my parents ended up there. Yeah.
So did you go from, you were active in the church, I guess. I guess
was.
We should ask that. Baptized and
absolutely
busy in the church. And
yeah, I loved the church from a very young age. I was very active in it. Anything to do with the church that I could do, I did.
Took seminary.
I graduated seminary.
Scouting?
I was an Eagle Scout. Yeah,
and
did all that. And
congratulations.
Yeah, and actually where I was raised, I was one of 20 out of about 2,000 in my high school that was LDS. So I was in a bit of a minority in the town where I grew up.
Were you a close-knit group then, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely.
The 20 of you.
Yep.
So did you stay there then, and
I did.
Were you called on your mission from there?
Well, I actually I was, and early on in my teenage years, I actually had an event that kind of cemented me more in the church before I was really ready to go on a mission.
What was that?
It was actually when I was 16. My dad was diagnosed. It was like just three or 4 days before my 16th birthday. He was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and
oh my goodness.
Yeah, just a few months later he passed away. So
what kind of a cancer was that? Colon
cancer.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's just this sudden, quick thing that happened that none of us saw coming, and it just really shook me up. I was hurting and upset, and I needed some comfort, and I turned to the Mormon Church for that, because that system was already there, and that's where I felt like the answers would be to my problem. And so I turned to the church, and I found a lot of comfort in the doctrine of eternal families. That was a big doctrine that was pushed, that if we were worthy and righteous, that one day we could all be together forever one day. And that was what I wanted more than anything else at the time.
Your parents had been married in the temple?
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
You were born in the covenant? covenant.
Born in the covenant. Yeah.
Wow.
And that was, that was something I really grasped onto,
Yeah.
and brought a lot of comfort to me. And that was probably like, I would say the main hook that kept me, really invested in the church, because I wanted that. And
well, especially losing a father at 16 and thinking that
Absolutely.
you want to see him again, and,
Yeah.
and the eternal family.
Yeah, so I was big into temple work and genealogy and all, which is actually how I discovered that my great-grandparents were born in Colonial Juarez, Mexico.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that until I did the genealogy and was like, what? What
So
is this?
you were the first to find that?
I
or-
think my dad knew, but he never really talked about it. It was
Wow.
that polygamous history. We didn't really talk about it. It's like, if you did the research, it's right
Yeah.
there. But yeah.
Interesting as a young man that you'd be involved in family history that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I actually, after my grandfather died, because my dad's family was never sealed, his parents, because his dad was a convert. Because of that, I actually went and stood in for my dad as proxy in his family sealing.
When they were sealed.
Right before my mission, yeah.
Wow.
And stood in. That's how just gung-ho I was for family history work. I loved it. I was, really into it.
So losing your dad at that age didn't make you bitter.
No, not at all.
In fact, it did the opposite.
Yeah.
You strive to even work harder and be better so that you could keep that family relationship.
Absolutely. And I actually did have siblings that did become kind of bitter and pulled away from the church because of that experience, but I was kind of the golden child in my family. I was the one that, once my dad died, it was me. I was the priesthood. I was the one who was staying active. I was going to hold my family together and be the priesthood for my family, because my dad wasn't there anymore and my brother wasn't really active. I was actually the second oldest, but I was really the only one of the kids in my family that really was invested in the church.
And mom stayed with you?
My mom was very active as well, yeah.
Wow.
So then I got my mission call, and
where was it? Where was your mission to?
It was actually to Orlando, Florida.
Gee, we've heard that before.
Yeah, I know. So that's where I met several of the guys in the ministry now on Adams Road, Micah and Joseph and Jay, and so that was a really cool thing. But I guess I should say before that, I did attend BYU for a year or so. I applied to BYU and did my freshman year there, and then went off on my mission. And
now, did you ever have any questions about the church up to that point, going through? And then you went through the temple as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, going through the temple, it was, like I said, I was determined to see the church as good and holy and everything is right, and so I honestly didn't have any qualms or, questions about anything that happened up to that point.
Wow.
I would say really on my mission was when I first started having some questions and, things that stood out to me that didn't seem quite right.
What happened?
Pretty early on in my mission, I remember we were out knocking doors, and we met a Baptist minister who invited us in, and we tried to share with him our version of the gospel, and he was very polite and kind and just shared right back Romans 10:9-10, and said, "Elders, it's as simple as, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you will be saved." And with the mindset that I had, I couldn't accept that, because, see, I had been taught at a really early age by my parents that nothing in this world was free. There was just this idea that if anybody ever told me
if it's worth anything,
that anything worth getting had to be worked for. And so if anybody ever said something was simple or free or anything like that, I just shouldn't believe it. And so I just pretty much rejected it outright and moved on with my life. And then I remember we were visiting less active. We called them less active. They were actually inactive members of the Mormon church.
Less active.
And there was a guy who invited us in who was basically very gung-ho about the church, said he had a very strong testimony, loved it, and said, "Elders, I've just got to show you this book of these talks I've compiled." And there's all these old talks from the improvement era and different conference talks, and it was all about having your calling and election made sure. Now, I remember growing up hearing my dad talking about having his calling and election made sure, kind of this mystical, experience. I didn't really know anything about it other than the idea that Jesus would personally appear to you and confirm to you that you had made it, that your salvation was secure,
That's more than I knew, so,
and
but I'd heard the words, but...
Yeah. And so, this idea of that, and so I remember hearing my dad talk about this, and I remember up to the day he died, he was still very concerned that this hadn't happened to him yet, that he hadn't received that assurance. And so this guy showed us all these talks that were from general authorities talking about calling and election, and they said that in these talks, I remember there was a talk by Bruce R. McConkie, I wish I could find it now, but he said that if you didn't have it happen in this life, then you weren't going to make it to the celestial kingdom. And he taught that. I know it was pretty strong teaching. He taught that up to a certain year.
That's even above and beyond getting through the temple and the celestial marriage and all that.
Yeah. And so I remember this guy sharing it with us and saying, isn't this so cool? And they just stopped teaching this sometime in the mid-'70s, and they haven't talked about it since. And I was just kind of like flabbergasted, like, why would they stop teaching something that important?
Yeah,
that seems pretty important.
Fairly important.
You know, so but at the time, like I said, I was faithful, and I just said, well, I don't have all the answers, and
we'll know when we need to know.
Yeah, and I said, oh, maybe that guy's sources aren't right, even though he had photocopies of, the original printings. But so I moved on, and then there was a less active.
Now, just to clarify, sorry, was this the same? This wasn't the same pastor that had talked to Micah.
No.
At another in his story.
No, that was a different pastor. Yeah.
Okay, just to clarify that. But
no,
so you were saying
there's a lot of
something
Baptist ministers in Florida.
Yeah. So you go to another less active?
I did, yeah. And she was actually Relief Society president in the church for several years, and
before becoming
less active. And she had been teaching a lesson on the Independence, Missouri temple when they had first, tried to build it.
Right.
And there was a revelation from Joseph Smith that said, this temple will be built in this generation, and no hand shall stop it, and all that. And as she was preparing the lesson, she realized this is a false prophecy, and had that realization and couldn't go forward with the lesson. She backed off from the church, and she was very friendly again, not hateful, not mean, but just shared it. Elders, this is why I lost my testimony in the church, but I wish you the best, and sent us on our way. And I was just very confused. I was like, I thought all apostates were supposed to be mean and hateful, like that was my my idea of them. And
my goodness.
But again, being a good Mormon, I like to say I put it on the shelf and just forgot about it and moved on. And so after my mission, I served faithfully, completed my 2-year mission.
Okay.
And after that, I went back to BYU for several years.
Now, excuse me, did this overlap at all with Micah? Did you meet him?
No,
or,
I was
or
actually.
Anyone else? Did you meet Joseph? Or?
I did briefly meet Micah while a missionary. It was like right as I was going home, he was coming out. So I was kind of the generation before him.
Okay.
But I did become friends with Jay, who I believe you're going to hear from next week.
Okay,
And
Jay.
we talked quite a bit and became friends. So we kind of had that tie. Yeah. So after my mission, I went back to BYU, and while there, actually my junior year, I had 2 classes that really started to kind of shake my faith a little bit in Mormonism.
Institute classes?
No, actually from BYU. One of them, they were both religion classes from the School of Religion, I guess. And one of them was a New Testament study course. Now, it's interesting at BYU, your first year, you do an entire year of studying the Book of Mormon. Your second year, you do an entire year of studying the Doctrine and Covenants. And then in your third year, you have the choice of either doing the 4 Gospels for 1 semester or Acts to Revelation for 1 semester. So it's 1 semester as opposed to a whole year. Okay. And even then you're only studying one or the other, half of the New Testament.
Interesting.
And so being somebody who thought that I knew Jesus and believed in Jesus, I thought I already knew everything that Jesus taught. So I said, I know what's in the Gospels. I don't need to study that. So I said, I'm going to read the epistles, figure out what all these Christians have been trying to, ram down my throat. So I started studying that, and as I read, it was, really interesting. Most of what I read was just kind of nonsense to me. It was gibberish, like when Paul was talking about grace versus works, and I just didn't really get what he was talking about, or even the book of Hebrews.
Didn't understand it, so...
Exactly, and so I just kind of assumed that, well, if I don't understand it, then it must not be worth knowing. It's just,
Isn't that such a common thought?
And in the class, the teacher gave a lot of commentary, and we read different commentaries by Mormon general authorities that seemed to shed some light on certain things. But for the most part, I did not feel like it was nearly as fruitful a class as the other religion classes I had taken at BYU.
Wow.
And it's horrible to say, but I do remember the only thing that ever bothered me in reading it was 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where Paul talks about that a man doesn't need to be married. In fact, he encourages men to remain single so that they can serve God undistracted. And I remember looking down in the footnotes, say, where's the JST on this? Joseph Smith must have changed this, because this is obviously against our doctrine. And there wasn't anything there. And I remember...
You didn't get to that one, huh?
No, and I raised my hand in the class. There was time for questions, and I asked the teacher, why does the Bible say this, and it wasn't changed or anything, and we clearly believe opposite of this? And you know, it's just this hush fell over the class. Everyone just kind of looked at me like, you know,
like,
why would you ask that question? And the teacher just said, well, it's one of the mysteries of the gospel. And you know, next question, and just moved on. And
didn't really have an answer,
you know,
for it, and just don't worry about
absolutely.
it. You'll understand it later, probably.
And, you know, so being a good Mormon, I said, okay, it's a mystery of the gospel. I moved on. I accepted that. And, you know, then a short time after that, I took a class. It was actually a brand new kind of experimental class that BYU was offering called The Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith. And it was very loosely based on the book of the same name.
Oh, yeah.
But you know, the premise of the class was basically we'd read from such and such page to such and such page in the book, show up at class, and it was open forum. Anybody could ask any question they wanted about anything. Didn't have to be from the reading at all.
Wow.
And so I honestly didn't ask any questions in that class. I had, you know, learned my lesson from the New Testament class.
Asked enough questions.
Yeah, and but I remember
but you had some.
I did, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I had even more after that class, because I remember there were students in there asking questions about Joseph Smith having more than one wife, and asking specific...
Had you ever heard that before?
I always had assumed he just had Emma, and that was it. And that, you know, I had people tell me that on my mission, and I said, oh, they're just hateful, and they don't, you know, they're lying. And,
I always thought the wives came after he died, you know, because they wanted to be sealed after so that they could have him as a husband.
Yeah,
but
exactly. And I thought the same thing. But,
that isn't true.
You know, then I had these people in the class raising their hands, asking about an angel with a drawn sword commanding him to marry this teenage girl, and you know, and I was like, what? You know, and these are faithful members of the Mormon Church, including the professor, you know, talking about these things and very frank, very open about it. And first time I'd ever heard that in 20-something years in the LDS Church, you know. So that started really shaking my faith in the LDS religion. Even a story they shared about Joseph F. Smith, who was still practicing polygamy after the manifesto, and was going to be brought before a federal court, and he basically told the judge of the court, who was Mormon, that he had to find him innocent. And they were talking about what a great example of following the priesthood this judge was, because he followed the counsel of the prophet, found him innocent even though he was guilty, you know. And
isn't that interesting?
You know, I always had this idea that once the manifesto was there, that everybody just laid down polygamy and followed, you know, what was taught, and that was not the case either. So. So that started kind of shaking my idea of the foundation of Mormonism as I had been taught it. So during the summers, while I was at BYU, I was coming out to Florida to hang out and spend time and work in Florida, spending time with all the guys in the ministry and getting to know them better.
On what basis? I mean, had you...
Well, you know, we were all, like I said, you know, from the mission, and we were all kind of musically inclined, and, you know, it was just kind of a, you know, we just got along well, and it's just hard to explain other than God just kind of drew us together. So.
Oh my goodness! So you were active Mormon at this point?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But you were aware of where they were at?
I actually wasn't. No, I was actually a little bit in the dark because, like I said, I had been at BYU and that whole transformation with Micah happened where he came home from his mission.
You weren't aware of all that?
I wasn't really. No.
Oh, okay.
And so I went out after that school year to Florida and started noticing that some of the guys in the ministry, or that were friends, you know, now they're in the ministry, but I noticed that they had stopped going to the Mormon Church, and I was trying to get them out. I was like, come on, you need to get active. I was like, I got to do with these guys what I did with my family. I got to, you know, get them in, you know, and
so did they start sharing with you?
They did, and that's really kind of what happened. I think they got tired of, you know, me harassing them, dragging them out to church. But
so okay, we got to share the truth with this. With Steve. So what did happen? What kind of things drew you away from
Wow. Well, you know, it's funny actually. I always told them that if anybody ever said anything against the church, I was gone, because that's how devoted I was, that I did not want to hear anything against the Mormon Church, and I suspected something was up. But you know, one of the first things that was shared with me was that one of the guys basically just told me, look, Steve, here's the facts on Joseph Smith. He was a false prophet. You know, he, you know, stole other men's wives, he had more than one wife, etc., and told me all these things. And the thing about this was that it wasn't the first time somebody had told me that. I had heard that on my mission and had written it off, you know. But this time it was like, because of all the things I'd learned from LDS sources. These weren't things I learned from anti-Mormon writings or anything else. It was from LDS education.
This time really...
I couldn't deny it. I knew that it was true, and it was horrible because you know, I didn't have a warm, fuzzy feeling or anything else about it, knowing it was true. I just knew it was true, and it was devastating to me. You know, my whole foundation of faith in the LDS Church just fell apart, and I couldn't deny what they were telling me.
Yeah.
And it was a scary time because I didn't, at the time, I didn't believe I could ever have faith in anything ever again. I didn't know if I could believe in God or in Jesus or even in the Bible.
That does happen, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
If the true church isn't true, then what?
Then nothing is.
Yeah.
And really, you know, looking back at it now, I was throwing the baby out with the bathwater because, you know, it's sad because Jesus is such a part of LDS culture in that they refer to him, they claim to worship him, that when I left, it was like, well, I can't trust Jesus. That's part of Mormonism. I didn't realize there was a true Jesus apart from Mormonism.
So explain a little bit about this Jesus of the Mormonism and the Jesus of the Bible.
Yeah, well, you know,
take a second. And
yeah, well, that was one of the hardest realizations for me to come to. Was like I said, I had that idea that nothing was free, and so I believed that salvation had to be worked for. And you know, the hardest thing for me was getting past that and realizing that God was offering me salvation as a free gift, and that the Jesus of the Bible, you know, the true Jesus, was so much more loving and compassionate and merciful than I ever gave him credit for. But you know, in the process of discovering that, you know, it's funny actually. I was the last one in the ministry to come to Christ, as I kind of mentioned, and when I lost faith in everything, all the guys kind of said, "Steve, just read the Bible, give it a chance." And God had to humble me because I didn't believe I could learn anything new from the Bible. You know, I thought I'd learned what there was to learn from it, and
you'd taken institute classes and everything,
so
but this time it made a difference.
Yeah, so I started reading, and as I read these same passages I had read in that New Testament class, but this time they were just coming alive to me. It was like the Word of God had all this truth in it that I had missed. And I was like, how did I ever miss this? It's so clear. Even the book of Romans, it was like, before it was nonsense to me, suddenly it was like ABC. It was just simple. It was there. And it
made such sense.
Yeah. And, you know, it just confirmed what that Baptist minister had tried to share with me all those years before that was, again, kind of nonsense to me at the time.
Yeah.
And God started opening my eyes, and I began to see the truth for what it was. And it was, and that was the amazing thing to me, was that I had always supposed that Christians took this idea of grace as a free gift from like one or two verses in the Bible. But as I read, I saw it was the message of the entire New Testament. It's everywhere.
Isn't that amazing?
It was. And that honestly is what made me have faith in the Bible for the first time, was because I didn't know if I could trust it, but when I saw the uniformity of the message and saw how it all lined up,
He
not
that
just
believeth
Paul.
in me,
Absolutely.
believeth, hath everlasting life.
Jesus, Paul, Peter, James, John, all of them agreed on that same key doctrine, that salvation was a free gift, that it could not be worked for. And you know, and that was such a cool thing to come to the realization of, and that was really what converted me, you know, and made me realize that I wanted to know the biblical Jesus, that I wanted a relationship with him.
And once your eyes are open, it's like you say, everything, it goes from black and white to color.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
absolutely.
just so everything that everything you read now means so much more, and Jesus means so much, and his sacrifice on the cross means everything. It wasn't this time in the Garden of Gethsemane. I mean, it was the purpose of temples and everything was shedding of blood. And
absolutely. Like it says in Colossians 2, you know, that he took that written code that stood against us, stood opposed to us, and he nailed it to his cross. You know, so it's not condemning us anymore. You know, it was paid. That cost was paid, and we're not bound by a law anymore, but we're under the grace and freedom of Jesus Christ.
Why don't the LDS? Why don't we see that? How is it that you were able to go to institute or religion classes, and I was able to do what I did for 60 plus years and not see it?
Well, I think it's...
What is it?
You know, it's spiritual blindness is the best, you know, way I can put it. I saw those same pages, those same passages, but just couldn't see it. And, you know, Satan, you know, has power to deceive, and that's, you know, really just what it comes down to.
Yeah.
You know, the Bible talks plenty about people, you know, seeing but not perceiving, and listening but not hearing, and all that kind of thing, and just that idea that when we get caught up in the teachings of men, you know, it's easy to miss the truth. You
were saying about grace being so prevalent in the Bible. That's one thing that I've felt about the words false prophets, deception, lies, things being hidden. that message is just repeated over and over, those cautions and those warnings. Paul talks about if another angel preaches a gospel, or I don't know exactly the words of the purpose of the cross is hid to those who don't believe. I mean, there's just so many references to deception.
There is, yeah.
And you called it spiritual blindness.
Yeah. Well, even, you know, the Bible talks about that God will send a strong delusion to those who loved the lie more than the truth, you know, even so much that, you know, we can, you know, believe we have signs from God that we're in the right way, but, you know, if we love something more than God, He'll give us what we want.
And we worship the creature more than the Creator.
Yeah,
and so we set ourselves up as idols almost. And the church certainly, I felt on my mission that I didn't preach Jesus. I was preaching Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, and the church.
You know, I think a lot of it too is based on a misconception, because I believed that Christians had this idea that they were saved by grace so they could just sin all that they wanted. And that is so contrary to what the Bible says. It says we're not set free to live for sin, but to live as slaves of righteousness, you know, be a living sacrifice to God.
And once you're born again by the Spirit, you want to do good because you love God and you love your fellow man.
And that's what James 2 is saying. Of course, faith without works is dead, because if you have true faith, works will follow as a natural result of that.
As a natural result.
And, you know, let me just say this, the greatest moment in my life was when I finally just surrendered to God, because I wanted to have something to do with my own salvation. That's a humility, right? Yeah. And I wanted to have something to do with my salvation. It was hard to let go of that. But when I finally did that, I felt like a physical burden lift off my shoulders.
See, I think it's that Mormon pride. I think it's that the LDS have a pride that doesn't allow them to see. And you have to become humble. You have to be broken. You have to be as a child.
Absolutely.
And to be willing to accept that gracious gift.
Yeah, and that's the amazing thing, is realizing that, you know, there is a burden on your shoulder. Even if you don't feel it, you know, when you're LDS, it's there. And when that burden is finally lifted, there is a major difference. That was when I knew I was born again, because I was suddenly a new person. I was free. I was alive. I really felt love, joy, and peace for the first time in my life.
Your sins were paid for. Absolutely. And we're evil. We're wretched, we're sinners, and God took care of that.
Like it says in Isaiah, our righteous acts are like filthy rags. You know? But,
well, Steve, thanks so much. You've got a wonderful ministry and a wonderful testimony, and praise God. And are you married now?
I am, yeah.
And children?
I've got a 2-year-old girl and a 6-week-old boy. So.
I hope we didn't cover that already. I apologize. But,
no.
But happily married, and she's
Very
with
much.
you. And
give God all the glory for everything He's done in our lives. So.
Well, praise God. I appreciate your story, and I hope you LDS will take a moment and turn your life over to God. Give Him the credit and ask for forgiveness, and turn your life over to Him, and He'll bless you. See you next week.